What's going on, everyone? First of all, thanks for joining in and watching the video. The Dune Awakening Gamescom 2024 coverage. We've got a lot to go over in the video. I just want to say it is going to be a long one, so stick in there with us. You're definitely going to learn some things about the game from this video. Just want to preface it, though, by saying it's going to be a bit of a doozy. So I appreciate you rocking with me. Also, this is my face. I'm sorry. So without further ado, let's get on into it, see what we can pick up from the Gamescom footage. All right, let's do it. Gamescom 2024 was a huge success, looked like a great time. Really wish I could have stayed in Europe and gone to see that. But let's talk about what we got to see so far for Dune Awakening. Starting out in the tutorial cave, you actually get a list of items, including the planetary emote that you select in your character creation. So here we see the Atreides salute, and he's actually looking like he's doing the chip and shatter. So that's a good confirmation for people that want to choose Atreides. Moving right on along, you start out crafting a scrap metal knife, and here we can see the first sign of resources, including plant fibers, and the scrap metal knife uses something called salvaged metal. We'll see more about that in a second. Craft the knife, explore the cave a little bit. You cut through these water seals, which is an interesting design. I like the way that looks. And you get this glow tube, which is sort of the player equivalent of a flashlight. Start gathering some things. You build a health kit, wrap yourself up in a bandage, get a little health back. So a nice sort of tutorial mode to show you the basics. They also showcase the climbing here, and what I thought was interesting was this vaulting animation. So you actually get to jump while climbing, which is awesome. Fast forward a little bit through the worm. We've seen that a couple times. So what we see here is the player drinking plants and hitting a sap limit. So you won't be able to get past 1/3 filled on your water meter by drinking random plants. So we also see here the salvage metal like we talked about a little earlier with the scrap metal knife. So these are just going to be pieces lying around that you can freely pick up. You'll be able to disassemble pieces from around the world of crashed ships and things like that to fill up your backpack. Here's the volume meter that shows you how much you have available in your backpack. They're not going to be using an encumbrance system, but every piece of inventory will have a volume to it. Here we see the spice withdrawal debuff and the spice addiction meter, presumably, in this sort of directed cutscene where you get this spice sickness and then you kind of pass out. Fast forwarding a little bit, we get to see a player using the binoculars and looking at an enemy camp, and then using their suspensor belt a little. So if you look down left, you see that it takes your battery meter a little bit. And then this is the great part that everybody's really excited about, the Shiga wire suspensor belt combination. Look at the distance that this lets you cover. I really think this is going to be a highly utilized mode of traversal, getting around the world, pairing that with the climbing system, and so on. Here we get to see the first look at the crafting menu. This is the Essentials tab where you get to see the Solido construction tool, a few other things that are really interesting. First time that we actually get to take a look at some of these things. The Maula Pistol, which looks like it's going to be the first weapon that you craft in the game. It only costs 15 salvaged metal, you can see there. So that's a pretty affordable, quick and easy firearm to start the game with. Here we see a player going into an enemy encampment. Now this is a trooper build. They've got the Shiga wire skill on Q and they've got a grenade skill on C. You see them use the grenade here, which goes into cooldown as soon as the grenade explodes. And then they go into getting a couple nice headshots and what looks to be a critical hit indicator right there. That's going to be really fun to see play out. I think the gunplay looks awesome. I think the, at least early stage gameplay here looks really solid, especially for being still in middle of the beta phase. It looks like a good time, honestly. We see the player use a health kit here where they start to heal over time, but they step back into the battlefield and actually get hit and it stops the health from recovering. So make sure you're in a place that's safe before you go back out into the battlefield so you can heal up all the way. We finally see a little bit of melee, but first we see the salvaged metal in the wild, so you'll be able to find that randomly throughout the lands and pick it up. The player then does a little dodge step here, a little side step to close the gap, and we see the flying knee in action. So I've lined up a couple of these just to show what it looks like. You will target the nearest enemy in your line of sight, and it will close the gap and hit them with a flying knee, which seems to do a good bit of damage, at least for low-level enemies. Then we get to see this followed up by the first sign of real melee. People are having a little bit of a gripe about this, but it's still early in the builds. This is the Riposte skill. As an enemy hits you, you trigger the skill, it'll catch their attack and deliver a blow back to them. You then see the level up meter here, showing you what you've earned for every time you level. And then we get to see another little bit of melee with this 1-2 and a strong finisher, or a heavy attack perhaps. We're not really sure how it works just yet, but this could be something that you use for a stronger or a slow shield piercing. It does take a bit of stamina there, as you can see, so that is something you'll have to weigh the cost of. People are a little up in arms about the melee and how it looks, but I caution people to just remember it is a beta build and we're still very early in development. Here we get to see the first sign of a shield wall, which is a new skill we hadn't known about. And we also get to see shields getting popped for the enemies, which looks really cool and kind of gives you an idea of what it will take for the time to kill, at least for NPCs. We hadn't seen the shields before, so this was a nice opportunity to get a look at them. Here next to the water hydration meter, we actually see this smaller meter tied to it that I'm betting is going to be the player inventory water. Whatever drinkable water you have on your person is going to be in that meter that you can quick use with F to fill up your hydration if you should need it. A couple more looks at some close quarters gunplay and the flamethrower and explosions in general, which I think look really, really cool. Another bit of melee here. This is the assumingly perfect block being used in action. So you go into a block stance, and if you can maybe time it right, you can parry the oncoming attack, and the player does get hit with the attack there. You can see their shield go red. Moving over into battlefield calculus, this is really interesting because it lets you see pretty much all the pertinent information around you, including what containers have nearby. You can also see what skills and how much ammo your friends and enemies have on them. Another quick note, they didn't have to make the used clips have physics to them. I just think that looks really cool, so that's pretty cool that that's in the game. We then move into looking at the Hunter Seeker, and you can see that it shows teammates on your side that are sort of blacked out. You can still see the battlefield calculus working here. You also have an interactions menu while in this mode, and then you get to use your Q skill to initiate the kill move there. Another cool thing about battlefield calculus, it seems to not only work through walls, but at quite a great distance. You can see it lets you know that there's enemies around way out across the battlefield. We then move into looking at a little bit of Exsanguination, but first we notice the salvage power pack, which we'll see later, but this is something you'll have to equip in order to power your suspensor belts, shields, and other things. We also see the respawn beacon for the first time, and that's what you're going to be using for one of your options to respawn. Moving over, we see this other tab, the Water Discipline tab. This is where you're going to craft your blood sacks and your blood extracting tool. That'll be good for taking the water off of fallen enemies. You can see here that each blood sack has 3 fillable parts to it, totaling 3,000 milliliters. So you'll be able to fill up 3 times before you need to craft another blood sack. We see the player go and take blood from a fallen enemy, and as you can see here, it fills up one of the 3 potential uses of the blood sack there. So then it moves over into drinking the blood that they have just gathered, but I don't really see them use it, but it does remove their health, and you get the blood drinker debuff, and it says you consumed 1,000 milliliters of blood. You do gain some hydration from it, but you're going to have to weigh if it's worth it or not to incur that blood sickness. Moving on into building, we actually get our first look at the Sub-Fief terminal. Here you can see that you only have a max of 3 per player, and down in the bottom left you see that it costs 15 electricity to manage this, so you will be having to power your bases and maintain a certain electricity level. You can also set the respawn point at any of these 3 terminals, but you can only have it be one of the 3 terminals. We also see this number 3 over the Sub-Fief console. I believe that this is a permissions indicator, which we will be talking about a little bit later, but basically you're going to be able to lock out certain people from accessing certain parts of your base. Skipping through a little bit of this, we do see some of the blueprint system at work here. Little note that things obviously have to be attached to a solid piece before you can keep them. They might deteriorate over time, but they have to be locked into something that's already standing on the ground. A cool note about this was that the sky is basically its own living entity, and it's going to have flying ships going around all the time that may or may not crash. They may or may not have anything to do with the player itself, but they will be up there, and it just kind of makes the living world a little more believable, which I think is really awesome. Here again, we see some of this shared blueprint system. One important thing I noticed that pops up when you're nearby a base is that you get this indicator of the time of day, what part of the region of the map you're in, what the PvP system is in that area, and then a heat and radiation level. Why would you want to build a base in a high radiation level? I don't know. Also, we see that there's no overlapping allowed, so this is a grid-based snapping system for building. So you won't be able to get too crafty with the way you build, but it still looks like a great time. Here we can see that you need stability in order to maintain a build, so you have to have maybe pillars or foundational pieces. I also want to talk about this water sealed indicator over here. When you're out in the open completely, you're going to be unsheltered at the mercy of the elements. If you move into something with at least a roof over it, it seems like you're going to get the sheltered buff. If you're within a room that has most of the walls around you, you become enclosed. And then if you're actually in a room that's, well kept, you'll get this water sealed buff, and that will prevent any dehydration from happening to you while you're in there. Here we see this permissions lock again, or what I'm calling the permissions lock. Now this to me is a way to keep questionable characters from certain parts of your base. Let's say you've got a guild and you don't trust the low-level members just yet. You can potentially keep them locked out of places that you don't want them to get into. We've also seen this scene 2 times in the various trailers that just came out. The one on the right does look a little bit more polished, but they've also introduced 2 completely different forms of the UI here for this blood purifier machine. So let's go with the older looking model. Now pay attention to this meter on the left, the volume meter. That is tied to your backpack, it seems, and we will see a little bit more about that later on in the video. This is the newer version of the UI, assumingly. We're not sure which one's going to make it into the game, but here's at least a look at both of them to get an idea. Nevertheless, here we can see a fully filled blood pack, and once you deposit the blood, it will take it away from the blood packs themselves, and it even causes a little degradation to the durability. Then the blood purifier will begin to extract the water from the blood, and you can see this is in fast forward, so you have to wait for that to finish. But we actually experience a literal split here in the timelines. The one on the right goes out the door, and the one on the left follows the golden path, so we're going to follow along with him down into the vehicle crafting garage here. Now we do get a good look at what the technology tree looks like. Here we can see several categories that are indicated at the top here and marked by their icons down on the left side. Each one of these is actually going to be a bundle, so when you do unlock one of these, you get access to a number of items in the game that you'll then have the ability to craft. So each bundle will be indicated by the number of items in it that is also told to you by the icon down in the bottom left. The intel points are up at the top right, and you can see them noted at the top of each of the items as well. This will tell you what you're going to get into before you purchase it. Stepping over into vehicle craft, we get to see the first looks at how to assemble a sand bike, and we even get the resources needed to do so. So copper ingots in the game, something called advanced servox. Here's an interesting thing too. These are icons that mark where you're going to find these things, and the old Imperial tells me that possibly the Imperial Basin is going to be in the game somewhere, or it's maybe a region or several types of a biome that you'll come across throughout your travels. Pay attention to that because it will become a little bit more important later in the video as well. We also see up here that there's a water tab for maintaining the machine that you're using, and a storage tab for storing your own resources in there so you can just craft from chests, if you will. Everything goes into a queue as it is producing, and you can see the machine actually stops and starts as it is working on things. So that's a good indicator to know how far along you are in the crafting process. Then you have to go and build your bike piece by piece, which I think is just really cool. The whole system looks really, really fun and modular and customizable. So looking forward to that. We finally get to see the first looks at a crashed ship in action. Again, the smoke and particle systems look very nice in this game. I'm a fan of what I've seen so far. We're not sure why there's a sort of cross-out icon at the bottom here, but you'll notice that there isn't any Sandworm Meter currently. It does pop up right here as soon as he gets off the bike for a split second, so I'm not exactly sure why that is. Also not sure what that green area is in the back left out there, but maybe a radiation zone? Hard to say right now. We walk over to the crash site, we find a couple storage crates. You can see what the looting system looks like. It's a dynamic looting system where you don't have to open anything, you can just walk up to it and see what's inside, which is great. Here we see a Sardukar ship patrolling at night, and you can see that it's covered in this blue glow, which means the ship is shielded, so I don't think attacking it is going to be much of a fruitful endeavor for you. We see harvesting plants here and something called poor harvest time, which I'm not sure how that's going to work, but the limit has apparently been reached, so I'm not sure why he's even doing this. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but boom. In the blink of an eye, you get hit by the Sardukar ray, and it looks like it actually paralyzes you for a little bit or puts you into a floating stasis. You can see the ray going down from far away, so you can tell if somebody's in trouble. If you want to come bail them out, that's up to you. The Sardukar then descend down to the surface and you engage with them. Now, hopefully you're well equipped for the fight because they are not going to be an easy bunch. And they actually seem to even have abilities. You can see here that this Sardukar flies through the air with what looks like maybe a suspensor belt, so it's going to be pretty tough. Here we see the worm meter in action on the open sands. Using bikes is obviously going to upset it, any tools is going to upset it, but we do see you get to hand harvest, and that seems to be a quieter action that won't be terribly risky. But here we see the sand compactor, and it actually does use a bit of the battery meter down there, so as well as calling the worm, it's a risky move, but maybe if you can get in and out quick enough, it's worth that risk. Here we can see the meter has tipped over and the worm is on the map as indicated up top by the compass, so now it's time to leave. This was one of the coolest parts of the demo trailer, I thought. The worm skirts through the sand like a shark out of hell. You cannot outrun this thing. They get a little lucky for the trailer so that you can see what it looks like to avoid it, but here you can see that once they get close enough to a rock cropping, the worm goes back to docile. So there's about 20 yards out of any rock structure that you're safe to roam around in. And then the worm just stares at you like some kind of insane dog, which is terrifying. In the overland map, we know about the fuel and water reserves for your Ornithopter, and we know that if you run out, you're going to have to crash land somewhere and gain more resources. We just didn't know how that was going to work, but now we do have proof. It pops up right there. You can see in the top left, water and fuel deposits. So it is a place on the map it'll likely teleport you to that you'll have to gather more resources and get back up into the sky. We land in Harko village. I just wanted to take a slow moment to look at how this place looks, the liveliness of the NPCs walking around, the cloth physics on all the capes look really great to me. I think it's going to be really fun to meet up with your friends and kind of peruse the alleyways of the Harko village. So here we get to see the first looks at what the interaction menu looks like between players. When you pull up the interaction wheel, you'll get to look at their profile, send them a message, invite them to your party, or even trade with them, which I think is going to be really interesting. And here we get to see the color options for your still suit. If you watched the last video, that's pretty much confirmation of that. Another big thing is sitting. Baby, we get to sit. I'm very excited about sitting down. Walking into this area, which looks like a CHOAM depot, you get to maybe purchase Ornithopters at those terminals. And as you can see here marked by the banners, and in this clearer image, it is a CHOAM operation. So moving over to the Smugglers, we get to meet maybe our first Fremen interaction here. A smuggler that's selling you weapons, but you get to talk to them and ask questions. So maybe that's a sneaky little Fremen we haven't seen before. Here we get to see the tiers for certain materials, steel and aluminum for the weapons, and the cost of what a typical weapon will look like, but the player seems to be well suited, so it doesn't seem like it's going to break the bank. Skipping through the player faction alignment, we actually come to this scene, which is really nice outside of an eco lab. If you watched my last video, we talked about potential faction vehicles. This is pretty much confirmation in my eyes that we are finally getting to look at the Harkonnen Ornithopter. Now you'll notice here the red accents followed by kind of the bulbous shape of the Ornithopter itself and the red window tint. To me, that screams Harkonnen. I'm going to put my money there for now. Looking at the skill tree, finally, we get to see a couple new abilities, the shield wall being one of them that we saw earlier in the video. And here you can see the level at which you are in that skill indicated by the dots beneath it. And look, planetologist icon. Finally, we get confirmation that it's a thing. Here is where you will kit out your build, picking 3 active and 3 passive abilities. The passives are called techniques. Here's just a look at some of the cooldown numbers. You can pause to check these out and get a better idea of what your build might look like. The Swordmaster tree is interesting. It introduces something called Poise Damage. Now, we don't have any real info about this, but it might have something to do with how good your shields are and how much attacks can penetrate through those. Again, some cooldown numbers here just so you can get an idea of what the build might look like for you. Dipping down into an eco lab, we again see the water meter here that you will be using to fill up your hydration as you go through these little missions. We also see this holding G button, which might switch out your entire hotbar set, so you might get some quick switch options for a loadout, which would be cool. We see the boys having some fun in the eco labs, throwing grenades, getting rowdy. This all looks fantastic to me personally. I think it's going to be a great time. I can't wait to get in there and mix it up. Flamethrowers look great. Shooting looks great. The abilities all look really fun and arcadey. Here we see some high-level loot at the end of the eco lab with something called spice-infused Dura ingots. And we actually get to see here a high-level resource called Duraluminum. Take note of this, all the items have this icon in the top left that'll tell you where their location is. Going back to that Imperial Basin situation, we're going to be looking for different biomes in order to find certain materials in the game. Here's my boy, the Invisi Cloak, looking good. And here we get to see some of the actual PvP warfare, what it's going to feel like to get in there and chop it up with other players vying for spice. Rocket launchers, blowing up sand crawlers, flying around, getting nuts. Here's the first look we get to see at the Thumper, which looks like a big old piece, much bigger than any of the ones we see in the movies. We don't get to see much of how it works, but it looks like a two-handed object that's going to be quite cumbersome, so I wouldn't expect to overly use those. Here we get to see what the Ringmouth Worm looks like in this radius of how big they're going to be. This is maybe the most terrifying part of the trailer, getting to watch the sand around you rise up like a tsunami wave, knowing that your impending doom is just coming. And then we get to see the end of the trailer switch to this nice Iron Man looking Shiga wire where you get to fly up to safety and avoid being consumed. Personally, I'm very excited for the Unreal Engine Lumen tech and getting to chase shadows, if you will. As the day changes time, shadows will move around. You'll have to literally dodge and dart between these shaded areas to stay out of the sun and elongate your life. I'm very excited for the way the game looks, even interacting with other players that'll be able to kind of help you get along a little bit faster. It's going to be a good time. I'm very, very optimistic. I think the game looks fantastic. Sharing the experience with other players and getting to trade and share loot is going to be great. Here we get to take our first look at the inventory screen. Now this is very important. Here again we see the volume meter on the left, and this is how your inventory is going to work. It's not weight based, but it is volume based. So you'll see that you either have 125 volume or 50 items that you can put into your backpack, which is a good amount. And you can see that each item actually comes with a volume amount. So the rifle is 3 volume of your total 125. Here we can see some great stats for your weapons. That reminds me a lot of Borderlands and the variability in that. You can see here that it's an aluminum spit dart rifle, and you'll actually have to clean it. It has a condition meter, things will break down, and you'll have to maintain them, which is awesome. We see the armor here showing some of the stats that it's going to come with, as well as a customization button, which might let you colorize things, might let you alter the actual stats of the armor pieces. We don't know yet, but it'll be cool to see what kind of mix and match options best suit you out in the desert. And I think the CHOAM armor looks pretty awesome. Here we see the battery pack, along with a couple other slots for your suspensor belt and your shield, and maybe some other ones we haven't seen yet, but that's where you'll load out your player. Overall, I think the enemy design looks really interesting. I think all of the assets and textures look great. I can't wait to kind of get up close and personal with some of these character models and take it all in, because the design so far just looks really great. Here we see the shields being activated for the first time, and you can actually see the indicator covering your health bar in this sort of blue light, which is the way you're going to know that you've got your shield on. I also believe that you use the right D-pad to turn your shield on. You can see there by the health meter. A nice looking base here, and the first look we get to see at a sort of wide garage door for vehicle storage. Shared base building is looking great. And here we get confirmation from the last video that the Atreides style is its own style set, apart from what I call the Arakeen style, so there it is for you. We also get to see a light Ornithopter being constructed, which implies a heavy or at least a medium Ornithopter. We also get to see on the right side here the customize option for vehicle crafting. So that might be for colored armor trim, it might be for switching out modules, who knows. But in the last video, we didn't see this on the Ornithopter, so this is a new thing. What I thought was the condor tail giving speed to the Ornithopter looks like it might be these nice blue propulsion jet engines coming off the sides there. And if you'll notice, the Q symbol there is the same one that we saw on the Hunter Seeker from earlier, so maybe that's kind of a universal sign for go fast. The Ornithopters make their way out to the deep desert, which is on the outskirts of the Haga Basin, and then it'll take you to the overland map. Here we actually get to see the map with a bunch of resource icons that we haven't really investigated before, a new area called the Vermilius Gap, and the Fog of War on the map that you'll have to explore with your Ornithopter in order to sell your maps to other players and make them valuable. Crash shipwrecks on top of rocks, buried eco labs, and here we see the Ornithopter without the use of its wings. So whether it's a player controlled thing or they're damaged, the Ornithopter gets to glide on its own, which looks pretty fun, to be honest. Here we see what looks to be a Mascaret village adorned by a dead sandworm at the top there, and as you can see, the indicator of the purple ringmouth worm that we saw in the earlier Dune Direct 2 videos. This says to me the Mascaret. I mean, who else would be so perverted as to do something like this to the great-grandfather worm? So far, it looks like a really fun time. Socially, there seems to be a lot to do. The combat, to me, is coming along great. The gunplay looks very fun. I'm not worried about the melee too much. I don't think it's going to satisfy everyone, but I do think if you allow yourself to enjoy it, it's going to be a really, really good time. I think we've got a lot more to see in the coming months as development continues, and I honestly just can't wait to see what sort of other things come down the pipeline. But the best part about this is that Dune Awakening is going to be coming to us on PC in early 2025, and that is nothing to be sandy about. That'll do it for this one. I really appreciate you sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel for more. Until then, keep it locked here at Nism Plays. Peace!